Okay, I might get things going. It looks like we've got a few people in. So I'd like to say good morning or afternoon, depending on which coast you're joining us from, and welcome to the Melon Safety webinar. I'm Sam Grubisher, one of the RDOs here at vegetablesWA. I'm joined by my vegetablesWA colleagues, RDO Truan Vo and QA coordinator Joel Dinsdale. And our guest presenter is Dr. SP Singh from the New South Wales Department of Primary Industry. Today's webinar will focus on providing best practice advice on food safety and critical preventative measures for growers and packers of all types of melons. And thanks to the skills of the vegetablesWA comms guru Amber and a little post-production wizardry, we will also be releasing this in a Vietnamese translated version. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge and thank those who have made this research and presentation possible. So funders Hort Innovations, Melon Fund and Melons Australia, the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries, the Agricultural Produce Commission's Vegetable Producers Committee and vegetablesWA. And just a little bit of housekeeping before we all get going. Could everyone please ensure that they have their microphones muted, and if you can, if it starts to get a little bit glitchy, turn your videos off, as this will make for a smoother presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to use the chat function, and SP can answer all of those questions at the end of the presentation. And when we upload the webinar to YouTube, SP's contact details will be included, just so if anyone wants to discuss anything further or would prefer to discuss issues in a more private arena, you've got that access to SP. I think that's probably all for now. So I think we're good to go. SP, the floor is yours, and I hope everybody enjoys it.
Thank you, Sam. First of all, I would like to thank the Vegetables Western Australia for organizing and hosting this webinar. In today's webinar, I'm going to talk about melon food safety. As we know, microbial contamination of melons, especially rock melons and honeydew melons, is a great challenge for the melon industry worldwide. Bacterial pathogens such as Listeria monocytogenes and Salmonella, they can contaminate the melons in the field and can cause foodborne illness outbreaks, impacting consumers and industry alike. So to support the melon industry in Australia, the New South Wales Department of Primary Industries initiated a Safe Melons program in 2015 with an aim to develop a strong food safety culture in the industry through science-based best practice. This initiative at present is national in scope and currently engaging all major supply chain participants, including growers, packers, exporters, and even regulators. So this webinar is part of a melon food safety R&D project whose aim is to strengthen the melon food safety systems across the supply chain through adoption of best practice. So this is the second project funded by Hort Innovation using melon growers R&D levy and funds from the Australian government. To begin with, the fundamentals or the key pillars of our Safe Melon program, there are three of them. So what we are trying to achieve through Safe Melons program is by placing these three pillars, which are preventative controls, detective controls, and corrective controls. So firstly, I'm going to talk about preventative controls. These controls are designed to ensure the food safety incident doesn't occur. So we are training and educating the melon growers and packers to know and understand the food safety risks and follow best practice to manage those risks, and also follow good hygiene practices on farm and in packing houses. Secondly, detective controls. These controls are designed to predict the threat of a food safety failure. So as part of various food safety certification programs, growers are supposed to do microbiological testing of the irrigation water, post-harvest water, food samples, and packhouse environment. And as part of this project, we also conduct Melon Food Safety Surveillance Program, where we are doing a microbiological survey for all these samples. Thirdly, the corrective controls, which are mainly designed to mitigate the impact of a food safety failure after an incident has occurred. So we recommend that growers should have a robust product recall plan, as well as a through chain traceability system. In today's presentation, I'm going to talk about the melon food safety hazards in the field as well as post-harvest, but my focus will remain on how to manage those risks using best practice. Contamination can occur anywhere along the supply chain, but the maximum chances of contamination are in the field, and contamination generally spreads from the field to the packing houses. So all melon types, including rock melons, honeydews, and watermelons, they're grown in the field. So the microbial food safety hazards for all melon types are common. However, the post-harvest practices of melons, they vary with the type of melon. For example, rock melons and honeydew melons, they are harvested from the field, generally taken to the packing shed where they are pre-cooled, washed, sanitized, and then graded and packed prior to shipment to the market. However, majority of the watermelons in Australia, they are picked and packed in the field. So they are cleaned and wiped and packed in the bulk bins before shipping to the market. So I have a few housekeeping slides for food safety in general. So we advise growers to be risk aware. So growing melons in the field, which is a complex ecosystem where there are a lot of environmental and geographical factors which are interacting with each other. So we recommend growers should keep a watch on the wildlife surrounding the property, and also look for any animal intrusion in the melon fields. There are various other factors other than wildlife, which are mainly livestock operations. As we know that the animal feces is the major source of microbial contamination that cause issues in the supply chain. So growers are recommended to do risk assessment of their site, considering the presence of various livestock operations, including poultry, cattle feedlots, and even compost yards. The presence of these livestock operations around the melon field, or even upstream if you're getting water from a surface water, the various weather events such as flooding, runoff, and dust storms, they can actually contaminate irrigation water, or even can bring the pathogens to the melon fields. So coming to the management part, we understand that it's a challenge to grow melons in the field and to make sure they are not contaminated in the first place. There are a few agronomic practices which are scientifically known to reduce the microbial food safety hazards. So I have listed 3 of those key practices. The first one is raw animal manure must not be used in melon production fields. as raw animal manure is the source of various foodborne bacterial pathogens, which can survive in the soil for weeks and sometimes months. So we strictly advise the growers not to use raw animal manure or even compost containing animal manure, which could potentially will not be composted properly. The second practice is plastic mulching. Though plastic mulching is a common practice in the industry, but there are still a few growers who might not be using it. Plastic mulch reduces the contact of fruit with the soil. So it's a great practice to minimize the risk of microbial contamination in the field. Thirdly, drip irrigation, though it's also popular among growers, has been shown to reduce the contamination from irrigation water. So these three practices that I have listed, they make a huge difference in the pre-harvest microbial contamination on melons. Melon growers use a variety of irrigation water. It's generally surface water coming from the rivers, dams, or creeks. And the microbiological quality of irrigation water is important. As I mentioned, various food safety certification program requires grower to do testing on irrigation water. However, the quality of irrigation water is affected by various weather events, such as flooding or even drought. So growers should regularly check the microbiological quality of irrigation water prior to use. Some of the melon growing regions, especially Riverina and New South Wales and Carnarvon, Gascoyne region in Western Australia, they are more prone to dust storms. So dust storms have potential to transport or to transfer the pathogen over long distances. So we recommend that the growers should use dust storm, like for example, the windbreaks. They could be artificial windbreaks or some perennial trees, or even use of inter-row crops. Further to these various risk management strategies, field and packhouse inspections. I always lay a lot of emphasis on these inspections. Prior to harvesting, field should be inspected for the presence of any animal intrusion, which could be detected from the presence of feces in the field or from the footprints. We also recommend that the staff working on the farm, they should be trained to detect as well as report the intrusion of any animals on farm. Similarly, inspection of the pack house for presence of any excreta from birds or rodents is another critical step. So though inspections do not take much time, but they cannot prevent a food safety failure. Moving on to the various sources of contamination and cross-contamination, with my experience working with melon industry, harvest machinery, which is often neglected in terms of cleaning and sanitization, can be a source of cross-contamination, especially the conveyor belts that we use to pick and pack the fruit in the field. Other microbial food safety risk mitigation strategies are the workers' hygiene as well as health. As part of various food safety certification program, growers and packers are supposed to have toilet facilities and hand washing stations in the field as well as in the pack houses. And in today's time of COVID-19, it's even more important to ensure workers' health and hygiene practices are monitored on farm as well as in the packing houses. So far, I have talked about pre-harvest practices and microbial food safety risks. Now I'm going to move on to the post-harvest steps in melon handling. First, I'm going to talk a bit about watermelon post-harvest handling. So it's an industry practice to pick the watermelons in the field and wipe them using various types of cloths or rags. and pack them in the field bins. In this project, we have been doing a lot of laboratory experiments looking at the potential of these cloths or rags causing cross-contamination. We found that cloths and rags currently being used in wiping the watermelon could be a source of cross-contamination. So we did further experiments to determine if the moisture content in the cloth or rag will determine or if will affect the transfer of pathogen. We found that the dry rags or cloths, they minimize the risk of cross-contamination. So if growers or packers are using a bit more damp or the rags or cloths, it's more likely to spread the contamination. So we recommend these rags should be frequently discarded, and if they are to be reused, they should be cleaned and sanitized before reusing. Moving on to rock melons, honeydews, and specialty melons. These melons are generally harvested in field bins, plastic crates. And we have also found that the harvest bins can cause cross-contamination. They bring pathogens from the field to the packing house. So we recommend that the harvest bins for the melons should be cleaned and sanitized after each use. In case of specialty melons and rock melons, pre-cooling is an essential step. Though it's now has become an industry practice since we started this project, that melons are pre-cooled prior to washing. So we recommend that the fruit should be cooled to less than 10 degrees Celsius core temperature before washing, so that the risk of wash water infiltration into the fruit is minimized. So when we wash warm fruit, so for example, if the fruit is picked at 30 degrees Celsius and washed with water or put in a dump tank at 20 degrees Celsius, it can cause infiltration of water in the fruit, so which can potentially take the pathogens from water or from the surface of the fruit inside the fruit. So to prevent this internalization of pathogens, pre-cooling is a very essential step. Some growers and packers do not have dedicated forced air pre-cooling facilities on their farm. So in that case, we recommend that you can store harvested fruit overnight at 5 degrees Celsius and then process them on the next day. But pre-cooling is very essential in these melons to prevent infiltration of pathogens. Post-harvest wash water is a critical element in melon food safety. We recommend that only drinking quality water should be used for washing fruits, as well as cleaning and sanitation of the fruit contact surfaces, such as conveyor belts and packing tables. We know growers use a variety of water sources. Only few growers have access to town water. Most of the growers and packers, they use surface water for their packing sheds. In that case, we recommend that investment in water treatment, filtration is worth considering the risk that the use of surface water can pose in post-harvest operations. So filtration and treatment of water is critical, and bringing it to the drinking quality before it is used, it's one of the most critical points in post-harvest operations. So after fruit are pre-cooled, they are dumped onto the packing line for washing and sanitization. Some growers still use wet dumping, which means they're dumping their fruit into large capacity water tanks to minimize the physical damage. While most of the growers and packers of rock melons and honeydew melons, they have switched over to dry dumping because that's a low risk operation. So in case of wet dumping, it can become a major cross-contamination risk because the large volume water tanks, it's really difficult to maintain the concentrations of sanitizer at optimal level. And the frequency of changing the water it should also not be determined on subjective basis, for example, cloudiness of water or the presence of organic matter in water. So we recommend shifting to dry dumping to minimize this risk. In case you could like to continue using wet dumping, you have to manage the dump tank according to our Melon Food Safety best practice. In general, we recommend that wash water should be used once. So it's single-use run-to-waste system. If growers would like to be sustainable in their water footprint, we recommend that they should filter and treat the water before reuse. It becomes an expensive operation, but it's critical that recirculation of wash water without treatment can pose serious food safety risks. In last 2 years, the industry practice has changed a lot in terms of washing and sanitization of melons. One of the biggest change that we have seen in the industry and we have supported it is the automation of wash water monitoring and sanitization systems. So a lot of growers and packers, they have installed systems which can inject sanitizer in water and monitor the concentration of sanitizer in water and log the data. So it eliminates that human error of adding sanitizer into water and recording the concentrations periodically. So we also recommend that growers should have digital tools for measurement of concentrations of sanitizer and other parameters such as pH. The use of paper-based test strips has been widespread, but we do not encourage growers and packers to use those paper-based test strips because the readings can change from one operator to another. So the automation of wash water sanitizer injection as well as monitoring is the future for the industry, and a lot of growers and packers have already invested in this space, and we recommend that this is an area where industry can focus and minimize the food safety risks. So to support the industry in taking those decisions, we have developed a lot of resources on Melon Food Safety. So you can see one example on the screen. It's a fact sheet on fruit washing and sanitizing, where we have illustrated the critical control parameters that a packer must keep in mind and follow the best practice. Talking about sanitizers, chlorine has been the most common used sanitizer, but the industry has recently moved more towards the use of peracetic acid as a sanitizer. So the best practice, the recommendation for the Melon Food Safety is that the concentration of the sanitizer should be as per the manufacturer or the supplier's recommendations. And we should only use the sanitizers which are recommended and registered by APBMA. As I mentioned, chlorine has been the most popular sanitizer in wash water. So I thought I'll share an illustration on the management of chlorine. When we dissolve chlorine in wash water, it splits into two types of ions, hypochlorous and hypochlorite ions. So the hypochlorous, the green one on the slide, is active form of chlorine, which is generally present in higher proportion at pH 7 or below. So when chlorine in the form of calcium hypochlorite or sodium hypochlorite is added to water, it splits into these two forms of chlorine, hypochlorous and hypochlorite. Generally, the pH of water increases after the addition of chlorine. So there's another step that some growers and packers can easily miss, is the adjustment of pH after addition of chlorine. So if the pH is above 7, you will see more of hypochlorite and less of hypochlorous acid. So to maintain higher proportion of hypochlorous acid in wash water and to be effective, we need to maintain the pH 7 or below. So recording of data on pH is as important as recording the data on the concentration of chlorine. I receive a lot of inquiries around sanitizers from growers and packers. So we recommend that the use of sanitizer should be strictly according to the manufacturer's recommendations. But there are a few factors that growers and packers should consider. One is the concentration and the contact time, pH, temperature, and organic load. So it's a combination of all these factors that make your washing process more effective. And we have summarized all these factors in our Melon Food Safety resources, a best practice guide and a food safety toolbox, which can be downloaded from our website, dpi.newsouthwales.gov.au. And in these Melon Food Safety resources, we have also highlighted that packers should identify the potential hotspots where cross-contamination can occur in their packing sheds. For example, the harvest bins or the dump tanks or their washing systems, the brushes, conveyor belts, and packing tables and cool rooms. So these hotspots we have identified based on our comprehensive food safety surveillance program. So we identified these hotspots where those pathogens, they can potentially survive and thrive with time and cause contamination of melons. As I started my presentation with 3 pillars of our safe melon, first was preventative controls. So far I have talked about the preventative controls, both at pre-harvest and post-harvest level. Now I'm going to talk a bit about detective controls. So as part of this project, we have been conducting melon food safety surveillance throughout Australia in the melon growing regions. So we were targeting 3 pathogens: Salmonella, Listeria monocytogenes, and pathogenic strain of E. coli. We collected around so far 900 samples from growers, packers, wholesalers, retailers. We also collected samples, they were either in whole melon form or cut melons from retail. And some of these samples were collected from the field, packhouses, wholesale markets, and supermarkets. So we wanted to ensure that all melon growing regions are representing and all the critical steps in the supply chain that we could monitor the melon food safety. So out of around 900 samples, approximately half of the samples were watermelons and the rest were rock melons and some environmental samples. And the scorecard for the industry in last 1 year has been excellent. We only found 1 test positive out of 2,679 tests conducted on the samples that we collected from all over Australia. Just to mention that approximately 200 samples were collected from Western Australia. During COVID-19, we could not contact growers, so we were collecting samples from Perth markets. And Chris Hall from Total Quality Assurance helped us in the collection of those samples representing various melon growers of Western Australia. The final bit, the corrective controls. As I talked, the industry need to have a good product recall plan and end-to-end traceability to ensure if a food safety failure occurs, the damage doesn't spread to the whole industry. It should be restricted to the property or the packer where the contamination has occurred. So at present, we need to work in this space. Our domestic consumers as well as our importers, they are demanding that each fruit should be labeled. So this is the picture where watermelons from a grower in Queensland. They are individually labeled using a technology, blockchain-based technology called FreshChain. So these labels stick to the fruit individually, and they can be scanned by consumer, where consumer can give potentially feedback and look from where their fruit came. And these labels are very important in terms of your brand identification, as well as for product recall at consumer level. Because at the moment, it's even difficult to do product recall at trade level. Consumer level is not possible if the fruit is not labeled individually. So industry will be working more in this space, I guess, as there's more stringent requirements in terms of product traceability in the years to come. So this is another area where industry still need to do some more work. In our Safe Melons program and part of the project, we provide help desk service where growers, packers, or anyone who is involved in melon supply chain can contact us with their technical inquiries related to melon food safety. They can send me email and phone me anytime, and we have addressed a number of inquiries, even from overseas, where various stakeholders are interested in understanding or knowing how the food safety in the industry is managed, and who is providing the scientific advice and what is the current practice. So we provide that information to various stakeholders as part of this project. So this is my final slide from where I started. So the conclusion is that to manage melon food safety, we have to have a combination of various controls that includes preventative controls, detective controls, and corrective controls to ensure that the melon that is supplied to consumers, both in domestic as well as export markets, they are safe to consume. So I would like to acknowledge Hot Innovation Melon Fund for funding this project. Melon Australia supports our Safe Melon program in organizing various events and engaging with the growers. And I'm also thankful to the team from Vegetables Western Australia, Joel, Amber, Sam, and Truan. They have been fantastic to work with and organizing this webinar. And I would also like to thank Chris Hall from Total Quality Assurance, who helped us in a great way during COVID times when our food safety surveillance was interrupted. So thank you, Chris. And I'm happy to take questions.
Brilliant. Thank you, SP, yet again for another really informative chat, webinar, presentation. It looks like we do have a question from Truan in regards to production practices. If the growers' production practices are complying with the fresh care standard, is it enough to mitigate microbial food safety risks? I think Joel's also written that we have a representative from Fresh Care, Fiona Grimes, so I'm not sure if you would like to offer a comment or an opinion, both you and SP.
Yeah, thanks, Truan, for the question, and to vegetablesWA and Dr. Singh for the presentation. It's actually quite a timely reminder. I know that I've seen Dr. Singh's work previously, but at this point in time, I think it's a good point in time again to refresh everybody's memories on proper controls around melons in particular. But what Dr. Singh has alluded to is also applicable to all types of crops. So in terms of Truan's direct question, yes and no. So I say yes, where the owners and the workers, I suppose, are all fully engaged in their compliance systems, whether it be Fresh Care SQF, global gap, whatever they choose to do. If they implement it appropriately, if they're trained appropriately, implement it appropriately, and maintain those systems 365 days a year, if that's or for every day of harvest and operation that they're operating for shorter crops. We, of course, have things built in around cleaning and sanitation and post-harvest and pre-harvest water, which is backed by science and underpinned by the fresh produce safety guidelines, of course. So, you know, I suppose it's not as simple as a yes or no in terms of that. We always encourage, and the system is designed, that the businesses need to implement it on farm, suitable to their own areas, suitable to their own environment. So those that you're going to get down in, down in New South Wales, in the regions in New South Wales, are going to vary to those in, central and northern Queensland. They're going to vary to the Northern Territory due to weather, seasonal differences. Those up in Queensland could be subject to more rain. So there's different factors. So that's why the systems are designed that the risk assessments are there as a baseline, but additional risks need to think. So understanding those risks, understanding those hazards, and putting those additional controls in place, as Dr. Singh alluded to, like, the extra drip irrigation and the plastic for that, and putting in wind breaks and things like that, and doing inspections and crop walks are ultimately very important. It's not one single thing. It's a combination of a multitude of activities all time. But I think probably also, and the melon growers that do get audited under the Fresh Care system may have been asked this question: what Fresh Care has done to support melons in particular with the implementation of the best practice guidelines is asked our auditors and put a clause in the information we provided to our auditing teams and our trainers to say where best practice guidelines have been developed by a regulator or a government authority or an industry sector specifically, and the businesses choose to implement that at least the audit actually considers that and makes a comment in the appropriate sections of the checklist where they're putting in practices over and above our standard requirements, so that we can actually demonstrate those that are going above and beyond for best practice are actually getting recognised and supported in those attempts. So that was a good question, and thank you for allowing me to respond.
Thank you very much for that. It appears that we do have another question from one of our stakeholders saying, is there any training provided to retailers who may cut the produce once they've received it, or cutting the produce in store? Is there any training around that or any information around that you could give out, SP?
Yes, in this project, we did cut melon survey during summers over last 6 months, and we found that there are some gaps at the retail end, and because as part of this project, the first job was to identify those gaps at the production end, through the supply chain, and at the retail end. So we have found some gaps at the retail end in terms of some of the food safety practices, and especially the display conditions or the labeling of the cut melons. So we are actually developing a best practice guide, or one section in the guide which will be targeted at retailers. So we are going to take that work to the supermarkets and hope that they are going to implement that consistently within all their retail stores. So in our cut melon survey, we found there's a huge variation from store to store. The policies or their procedures are not consistent. Some are still displaying at ambient conditions, and some are labeling, others are not. And I would like to mention that there are some serious gaps at that end. So we will be engaging with the supermarkets once our best practice guide after its peer review, and we are also going to pass it on to some regulators, and then we will take it to the supermarkets and hope they work on that.
Awesome. There is another question from a stakeholder supplier saying, what can be done if they are seeing melons at a retail level that are unclean or damaged? Where do they go? Who do they speak to? Or will that be covered in the new best practice guide?
I guess the best person would be the store manager, and the consumer has right to say if they think the product is not suitable for sale. It should be reported to the store manager, and I would say they listen to the consumers. And I have done it personally, where I have approached a couple of independent grocers and told them these products should not be for sale, and they don't look like as if they should be, and they act on that. So I would say instead of going to a regulator, if a customer has complained and the store manager is not acting, so the next step should be complaining to a regulator in your state or territory.
Okay. So going directly to the supplier or whoever the retailer is, that's your best option, because they're going to have the lines of communication with the grower or the supplier.
Yeah.
Excellent. Also got another question from Elizabeth Frankish, asking what was the positive pathogen detection in the sampling program?
Yes, it was Listeria monocytogenes.
Which is not a good one.
No.
Thanks, SP.
No worries, but there's nothing to worry. 1 out of 2,679 is a great outcome. What melon industry at the moment is doing, I would like to elaborate that melons within Australia and overseas, they are under heavy surveillance. So there's a lot of testing going on melons, and we haven't heard anything in the last 2 years. So it means the industry is doing very well in terms of maintaining their food safety practices and supplying good food to the markets.
All righty. We have a grower question asking what studies have been done regarding the difference in pre-cooling and then dipping, or only freshwater wash with a chlorine shower following. They found that some melons stain after the pre-cooling and the stain can't be removed. So is there any study around that?
Yes, different types of melons, they have different optimum storage and pre-cooling conditions. For example, rock melons, you can keep them in cool room at 5 degrees Celsius, they are fine. And honeydews and some specialty melons, they should be stored at 7 to 10 degrees Celsius. So what happens in some cases, growers have used very low temperatures in pre-cooling the melons. And sometimes it's a good idea to do a gradient cooling. When a fruit is harvested from 35 or 40 degrees Celsius, it's good to pre-cool using air at 10 degrees Celsius and then bring it slowly down to 5 degrees Celsius. So it's your post-harvest temperature management which causes those chilling injury-like symptoms. So the grower should understand the type of produce, if they're rock melons or honeydews or watermelons. So they all differ in their susceptibility to chilling conditions. So yeah, so there's a lot of research in pre-cooling space, especially the infiltration of pathogens in rock melons. So it has been demonstrated that if the fruit is warmer and then washed with contaminated water, or even if the pathogen was sitting on the surface, it can go inside the fruit if you put it in cold water. So pre-cooling is very essential for these products.
Excellent. Sorry, continue.
I would also like to add on a couple of comments on fresh care related question from Toon. All these food safety certification programs, they provide, I call it first line of defense in terms of food safety risks, and they're great to have, but melon industry has gone well and above all those standards because none of those standards give you recommendations such as 100 parts per million of chlorine for 2 minutes if you're washing the fruit. So what we have developed in those best practice guides is very strong and straightforward recommendations, and in terms of even water quality. And we have also advocated these standards or the guidelines in a lot of our export markets through a project funded by federal government. I had this opportunity to go to various meetings with importing regulators in Singapore, Japan, and Middle East. And we have actually advocated that the melon industry is doing much more than what is prescribed at the lowest level or the basic level. So far, it has been going very well.
Alrighty, I've got another two-parter from our own Joel Dinsdale. Has there been a cost-benefit analysis being conducted between chlorine and PA sanitisers? And can the melon washing principles be applied to other wash lines of fruit or vegetables?
Regarding cost-benefit analysis, in terms of comparing the sanitizer, we know that peracetic acid is slightly expensive than chlorine, but it depends. It also comes with convenience. In case of chlorine, if you're using chlorine, you have to monitor pH, and you have to use the system where you manage pH as well as the chlorine concentration. And then you can also get a bit of odor issues in some enclosed spaces from chlorine if pH drops below 6.5. And in case of peracetic acid, the efficacy of the sanitizer is great in a wide range, so you don't need to worry about pH. But the only downfall is that it is corrosive. It can degrade machinery over time. So I would say some packers, those who want less of management hassles, they switch to peracetic acid than chlorine. So I think in long term, the cost benefit is, and research also shows that peracetic acid is slightly more effective on pathogens like listeria compared to chlorine. Though it's not, there's not much evidence, but there are some publications which suggest that peracetic acid is more effective compared to chlorine. So that's why we have been recommending the industry that if you want less management in terms of monitoring pH and those things, you switch over to the acid wash. And yes, those basic principles of washing and sanitization, they apply to the whole produce sector, but it depends with the type and the commodity. For example, we recommended 80 parts per million of peracetic acid for 2 minutes for rock melons and even honeydew melons. And those concentrations could cause burns in some of the produce, like summer fruit, peaches, and nectarines. So as I said, the washing and sanitization recommendations, they are on a very higher end for melon compared to other produce. So, but yes, I have received some inquiries from Western Australia, especially leafy vegetables and a few others. These basic principles, though, they are transferable to the rest of the produce, but it's always good to do a bit of produce specific investigation and then do recommendation.
Excellent. Okay, another question from Graham. Small landholders that are growing melons and feeding into farmers markets could be a risk to the industry. How widespread is the best practice info? And would it be good, and is it available to be communicated through the Sustainable Ag programs or the NRMs around Australia?
As far as melon growers and the scale of production goes, on the East Coast, the industry is highly consolidated. We have mainly large growers, and the small or even medium scale, some of those growers, they have left the bases, especially where there was a requirement of heavy investments in water treatment and all those requirements that went on. We have been trying to reach small growers through various organizations. For example, through vegetablesWA, this is an attempt to go to those small growers in some metropolitan areas and in Carnarvon and a few other regions where they are supplying the fruit. And it's a very tricky question. So one of the growers asked me what they can do without investing in washing and sanitization. I said, you can contact a packer who can potentially pack for you, or you can stop growing. Because we do not want the whole industry to come down because of one or two growers. So especially with the rock melons and honeydew melons, they have to wash and sanitize before sending it to the market. And we know that especially these small growers, they are common in Western Australia. And we have been trying to reach to them through various organizations and trying to work with them. So I think the growers cooperative and those large growers, those who can help those small ones pack their produce, is the best way.
Another grower query that probably links in with that, are there any processes being put in place to get more compliance around sanitation, or is it just sort of industry working together to sort of upskill everybody and things like that? But like, as far as compliance, I'm not sure. You're probably more in the space around that.
There's no formal system of compliance in terms of sanitizers. But as I would say, there are 20 rock melon growers or honeydew melon growers in the country who supply perhaps 95% of the produce. So we have done one-on-one consultation with those growers, and we have monitored their sanitizer levels over months and seasons. So we are quite confident because, as I would say, it's not only just the project. What we have been trying to do these projects is to develop that culture, so that these growers and packers, they understand the importance of that practice. And the QA and managers and the staff in those packing sheds, I must say, they are quite trained now. They are educated, and they know how to manage those critical elements in washing and sanitization in their lines. And I have been receiving numerous inquiries from these packers and growers in terms of buying digital equipment and readings and how to manage those things. So as I said, rock melon and the honeydew melon growers, they are large in scale and smaller in number. So we could provide one-on-one consultation, which worked very well in this case. So, but small growers, especially those who grow randomly here and there in one season or the other, it was really hard to reach out to them and provide those basic recommendations.
Okay. That's always going to be a tricky one with the people that sort of grow on off seasons.
Yeah.
If they're not doing it full time, then it's hard to sort of convince them of the benefits of actually putting in and getting these kind of processes in place on farm as a general rule.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's going to be more industry and sort of collaborative working to get everyone on board, because yeah, if one person goes down, everybody else tends to suffer, and I think that's the pain point for a lot of people.
Yeah.
All right, we've got another question from Fiona, I think, at Freshcare. there are various other studies being conducted related to alternate sanitation, such as plasma-activated water, and also work on segregating sanitation and fungicide treatment. How will these drive the changes to industry in the medium term, do you see?
In terms of the use of new sanitizer, because I'm the project leader where we are working on plasma. So we are working on the use of dry plasma as well as plasma activated water. Those technologies or those interventions will remain like supplementary, and I don't see them replacing the existing sanitation systems in place. And another point that I would like to mention, that especially with the melons, sanitizer treatment and fungicide treatments, these are two different steps. And industry is very clear that sanitizer is used to sanitize the water as well as the food surface, and the fungicide is to take care of the molds. And another interesting development that has happened lately is that industry has moved away from the use of fungicides. Either they are using very lower concentrations, and some of them have actually switched to hot water treatment, which is effective, as well as it also helps them to deal with their MRL issues in export markets. So yeah, so sanitizers and fungicides, and these are two different steps. And unfortunately, melon industry doesn't have too many options for post-harvest fungicides. So there are currently 2 fungicides which are registered. And yeah, so the industry is moving in that direction where they want to do less chemical in their post-harvest treatment space.
All right, it looks like we're up to the lucky last question. Possibly Fiona, you might want to weigh in on this, but the question is, could these guidelines be added to a food safety program like Fresh Care as like a bolt-on for melon growers as sort of an extra step in their Fresh Care accreditation, or is that a very tricky subject?
It's a tricky subject. Look, we would consider it if there was enough interest and warranted it, and we would have to work with the likes of Dr. Singh and the Melon Association, and and the retailers and all the stakeholders in making sure the criteria met the mark. I wouldn't say yes. I can't say no at the moment. We've got other things that we also need to consider. So, but we're always more than open to have the conversation with the players in the market, should they feel it was something that would benefit them. So, yeah, always open to the conversation, regardless of what industry it was too. If there was we do the same with, have very open conversations with, the likes of the ready-to-eat bag salad type sector as well. So, yeah.
Excellent.
Just a comment on that. Supermarkets, they have taken these best practice recommendations very seriously, and I can see these recommendations in their procurement programs incorporated. So though it's not a formal arrangement, but the recommendations have been taken up by the supermarkets, and they have enforced them in their procurement program with the growers.
That's a very good positive step because there is a pain point that we often see with people, and the pain point is, if I can't sell my produce, I can't make a profit. And if that's coming from the retailers or wholesalers sort of feeding down, that's another way that we can sort of gather in the smaller growers that are doing it sort of seasonally or one-off. So that's a positive to know that, yeah, everybody seems to be getting on board. it appears we have come to the end of questions. So I would like to say thank you to everybody for putting up the questions. I think that's given a little bit of food for thought, definitely for me, in the way that I deal with my growers and sort of how I can push them gently towards looking at better sanitation processes for all produce. And I would like to say a huge thank you to Dr. SP. It's always good to get some insight. You do get out on farm a lot, and you do use a lot of your experience on farm with your presentations. So thank you very much for coming along and joining us, and everybody else that jumped on. Thank you very, very much. We will be releasing a Vietnamese version of this post-production using all the clever things from our comms gurus. So yeah, hopefully if you've got growers or if you are part of the wider industry, if you could help us share that around so we can get to as many people as possible, because food safety is really important because nobody wants to kill anybody. But yeah, thank you very much for joining us.